Hi, it's Pastor Steve here, and we're continuing our journey cover to cover going through the Bible. And today is my birthday, January 25, and we're looking at Job, the book of Job, chapters 22 to chapter 25, verse 6. Now, as we continue this journey, I'm sure some of you gravitate to the book of Job. You find this interaction interesting. And still others of you are like, I am lost in the argument. But if you remember our first chapter, it comes down to, we know, the audience, we who are reading it, that Job's situation is not because he has sinned. In fact, God's attitude was, have you checked out Job? He's an amazing person. And so it's dealing with a very profound question. Are people who are suffering, experiencing bad things, are they having this experience because of the bad choices they have made? Now, as you and I experience this in our own life, do we often see people going through bad experiences because of bad choices they have made? Absolutely. We see it. But we also know it is true. Just because you're going through bad things doesn't mean it's because you did something bad and you're getting your comeuppance. And so this is the tension, because both Job's comforters and Job himself are seeing things kind of in black and white. Job's comforters keep coming back to this idea, Job, you must have done something wrong. It must be that you didn't care for the poor, or that you neglected something that you should have done. And then you have Job, who knows he's sought to live a righteous life, who is confused by the whole situation. You might say he agrees with the premise of his comforters, except he knows his situation. It isn't that way. And so he is confused. And right now it feels to him that God is just so far away. So if you've been in a place in which you're confused by the actions of God, if you're confused about what seemed to be the way you always understood things, well, sit next to Job, because he's confused by those things too. Now, a few things in this passage. Eliphaz, who is a Temanite, you might say, why is that important that he's a Temanite? Well, that's interesting because that refers to his family background, and it also helps us place the book of Job roughly in the time of Abraham. And we know where that family lived. It was in the area of Edom. And I know you're thinking, Pastor Steve, I don't know where Edom is. But if you think of the land of Israel, and if you remember in your mind the Dead Sea, it's the land right below, south of the Dead Sea. But that helps us place Job in time and place as to why we think it was written around the time of Abraham or the patriarchs. Now, I have mentioned before, and Pastor Seth has mentioned, that these comforters often get things wrong, but they often get things right also. And what is my measurement to know what right and wrong is? Well, I look at the New Testament, see how these things are described, and that helps me have a foundation by which I'm able to assess right and wrong. And when it comes to these comforters, it really comes down to this. They get a lot of stuff right, and some things they get wrong, because the ultimate premise of the book is sometimes people suffer, and it wasn't because of living an immoral life. I like the way Eliphaz starts off with, he says, can you help God? That's actually a great question, because sometimes I think I need to help God. And the answer is, not really. Like sometimes if I didn't share my faith with somebody, I might think to myself, I blew it, and they're not going to come to salvation because I didn't do my job. Well, the truth is, God sometimes uses us to draw people to himself, but he's fully capable of doing what he wants to do. So that's a great question asked by Eliphaz. And I also love something he says. I actually put it on the screen. So I have the book of Job. I'm using technology. But I love this verse. This is Job 22, 23 to 25. Eliphaz writes this: if you return to the Almighty, you will be restored. So clean up your life. That statement is true. However, this last phrase, clean up your life, well, that would be his understanding, but we know from the gospel, God takes you broken, and he receives you broken, and then he's hoping through what we call sanctification, being made holy, that you'll clean up your life. But Almighty will restore you even while you're broken, and he accepts you in your brokenness. But that statement is good news. Almighty will restore you. The verse goes on this way: if you give up your lust for money, throw your precious gold into the river, the Almighty himself will be your treasure. He will be your precious silver. That is true. Now, it's said in a poetic style. It's not asking you to go to the bank, throw all your money into Lake Mead. But it is saying to you that if you let go of all that stuff, God himself will be your treasure, will be your precious silver. I love that. And I think that is an important thing to conceive of. Well, Job, when he responds, he sends some profound things, he says some despairing things. And what I want you to hear from Job today is God just feels so distant from him. And we know Job's a good guy. We know from the beginning of the book. We will find it out at the end of the book. But sometimes people who are good guys feel like God is a million miles away. Don't be deceived to think that we don't go through ups and downs like that. Well, our passage ends with Bildad, who is another interesting comforter. And I have to say, I love his ending phrase. It was this: people are maggots. Well, I know this. God views you as his treasured possession. It says it in Deuteronomy. It says it in Isaiah. But I also know this. Romans 3, verse 23. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So when John Newton in Amazing Grace talks about God saving such a worm as I, or wretch as I, it's true. But I also know God kind of has affection for maggots like us. Anyway, lots of things to ponder here. I don't have all the answers, but I do think there is good stuff for us to learn from in this section. God bless you. Hi, it's Pastor Steve here, and we're continuing our journey cover to cover going through the Bible. And today is my birthday, January 25, and we're looking at Job, the book of Job.